Okay, welcome everyone. We are ready to start. I would request Professor Rege, Principal of Goa College of Architecture, to please give his welcome address.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vishvesh. Good evening to all people who joined from India, and good afternoon to friends from Portugal. It is my pleasure to welcome you all, especially the chairperson of this webinar, Professor Edgar F. Rivero, all the presenters in today's webinar, the experts, faculty members, the students, and all the people who've joined this webinar. My personal association with Portugal dates back to 1998, first through a research tour for my PhD work through Fundação Orient in Goa, facilitated by Professor Varela Gomes. Later on in March 1999, when I was invited to present a paper on Indo-Portuguese urbanism in an international colloquium, which was organized by the University of Coimbra to commemorate 500 years of journey of Vasco da Gama to arrive at Calicut in India. This was in 1998-99, which was to commemorate 500 years of this particular event. This colloquium resulted in bringing out a very scholarly edited book of abstract and main papers. The key organizers included architect Elder Carita, Professor Walter Rosa, and architect Renata Arroja, and many others. This was kind of the initial collaboration that I had personally with schools of architecture and other organizations in Portugal. And also I was representing Goa College of Architecture. Thereafter, this collaboration was taken forward by Goa College of Architecture through various programs, which were organized through Fundação Orient, especially during the tenure of architect Paul Carvalho in Goa, who became the delegate or director of Fundação Orient, as well as through Portuguese consulate in Panji. So this resulted in various joint studio programs from with schools of architecture in Portugal, including Lisbon and Porto, and Goa College of Architecture. And both these organizations facilitate the exchange and various other modalities. And this has been happening over a long period. The webinar event today is a result of the collaboration between ARTIS, Letras, Lisboa, Universidade de Lisboa, and Goa College of Architecture, which is affiliated to Goa University. ARTIS, in short, if I describe, ARTIS is the Institute of Art History within the School of Art and Humanities of University of Lisbon, is a research and development unit. And they have been doing a lot of programs in India and other places. So this webinar is also kind of a joint effort between these various collaborators. And I congratulate all the organizers who have worked towards this to make this collaboration happen. Let me now introduce the chairperson of this webinar, that is Professor Edgar F. Rivero. I would request Dr. Vishvesh to give a detailed about his works and his achievements, etc. Detailed description of that. And I would like to now hand over the proceedings of the webinar to Dr. Vishvesh. Dr. Vishvesh.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's so nice to see so many of you all join this webinar. Professor Edgar Ribeiro needs no introduction in Goa, doesn't require introduction even in Portugal or elsewhere. But for our new listeners and young listeners especially, I would like to just have a very brief some of his achievements. Professor Ribeiro is an architect passed out from Sir J.J. College of Architecture in Bombay. And then he's urban and regional he's done his urban and regional planning from University of Manchester in UK. In 1962, he joined the Government of India as a middle-level planner with the Town and Country Planning Organization, And he rose from that point to become at some point of time a chief town planner of TCPO in Jan 1989. And he, in fact, superannuated as a chief town planner of that post. Within that time, in 70s and 60s, he's done various things for national government, including setting up of different planning departments and town planning departments, various places, including Goa. So he has vast experience in planning. And in 90s, he served as the director of School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi before helping the INTAC establish its architectural heritage cell, which means essentially his link with architecture and heritage is quite long-standing, and he's very concerned with things with especially built heritage and built environment. He's also associated with different municipalities and development authorities, including the Delhi this thing, and was very deeply involved in the planning of and bringing out the planning 73rd and 74th Amendment Act in 92. Now, I mean, just to give a very quick this thing, I would just want to say that that apart from serving as various presidents of ITPI and other establishment, he has also been the vice president of International Society of City and Regional Planning. Currently, he resides in his ancestral home, Pururi, from where he is now going to chair this session. Thank you, Professor Ribeiro, for joining us and chairing this session. And I would please request you to take over the reign from here on.
Okay. Thank you. As time is very short and we have some very eminent speakers, I'll try and be as brief as I can. The focus really is, as mentioned in your brochure, the focus is on the Basilica's current precarious condition and therefore its future, its urgency. And I think this is what is extremely important. I'll just pick up some key dates. Of course, 1498, Vasco da Gama landed in Goa, but 1510 was when Alphonse de Albuquerque was here. The Jesuit order was formed around mid-1530s, but Francis Xavier really came in 1542, and he died in just 10 years later, 1552. His remains were then transferred to Malacca, but it was only after he was canonized some 40, 50 years ago, then the decision was taken to bring his mortal remains to Goa. As mentioned by the speakers, the Basilica was largely built between 1594 to 1605 and let's say 1624. But the remains of the saint was transferred to its present location in 1659, maybe from the professed house, etc. And for 100 years, it was exactly roughly 100 years later, 1759, that the Jesuits were expelled from Goa. The capital shifted in 1843 from Old Goa to New Goa. But a very interesting development is, we all know about the building with plaster. In 1890, somewhere there must have been some problem, and flying buttresses were built to prop up the building, apparently, and that also was in plaster. So it was not until Professor Baltazar da Silva Castro, who came, sent by the Portuguese government at that time to promote the Portuguese importance in its colonies, that he ordered the plaster to be pulled down. And that is what is the present position. People in Goa are not very clear. They seem to think pulling down the plaster is aesthetically good, but I do know that of late, and especially Father Patricio, I quote him, he's really worried that people keep on telling him that the building may come down at any moment, you better do something about it. And I think this is what has been happening. I just want to mention a few more things. It was not until 1968 that the central government extended the archaeological monuments, Archaeological Sites and Remains Act of 58 to Goa. And along with it, 21 monuments were identified, including 14 of them in around this area, most important of which was the Basilica and the Sikh Cathedral. It was in 1972 that under entry number 239, that UNESCO introduced 7 of the 14 monuments as having elements of international importance. As far as the Basilica was concerned, they said the facade was important. And I think the quote was, the Church of Bom Jesus, the facade with Ionic, Doric, and Corinthian pilasters, showing application of the classical order, which is important to maintain. So I'm mentioning this because the general belief is that the whole building is in the World Heritage List. It is not. There are elements. The UNESCO accepts that these issues are very sovereign. And so that's why it's only the facade that they're really interested in. I also want to mention it was in 2010 that the 1958 National Act was updated through the 2010 amendment, introducing the 100 meters and 200 meter line. This is very important because to protect all this group of monuments, you have this no development zone and you have the restricted development zone. And this is important to mention because there's a National Monuments Authority has also been brought into the picture. So the actors are many, the ASI for Protection and Preservation, the National Monuments Authority, and it was not until 2018 that the National Monuments Authority have brought out the rules and regulations in a very detailed form to prepare a detailed plan. And that plan is to be prepared by a competent authority. And they've named the competent authority, none other than the chief planner of the state. So the chief planner of the state has 2 roles, just to prepare a detailed plan for approval through INTAC and NMA and the central government. And of course, he has to also do entire regulation under the Goa Town Planning Act. I thought these are important aspects to mention. I also want to mention one thing more before we go on. In 2020, the government of India created 100 crore budget for Goa under the Prasad scheme, which is for pilgrim centers. And that is centering around the Basilica of Bom Jesus per se for pilgrimage. It's not only for protection. And I also want to mention in today's budget, the Chief Minister of Goa has mentioned another 100 crores of the state budgets that can also go in. There's a lot of importance for heritage. So what is the role of the state? What is the role of under the Prasad scheme, under a different ministry of the government? All these are issues which will be taken care of that plan. But today, we have to concentrate on one issue. And what is going to happen to the Basilica? It's plastering, whether we have to plaster it or leave it like that, and then have a scheme way forward. What action do we take? And for that, there is another team looking into this aspect and the technical aspects. Today, we have the speakers who will address those questions, and we are hopefully will be able to give a lot of answers through the 2 universities and colleges involved. So we have a very, each speaker has been given only 15 minutes to make a presentation. So I'll try and be brief. I have there, the first speaker is Vishvesh Kandolkar himself. He is Associate Professor of Goa College of Architecture. He largely researches on Goa's architectural history with a focus on early modern church design and the creation of Indo-Portuguese aesthetic and their afterlife. Apart from considering the social aspects of architectural legacy, he also attends to neoliberal cooperation of design influences. The focus of Professor Kandolkar's PhD research was on the cultural history of the Basilica of Bom Jesus, which is among the few monuments to have survived the steady decline of old Goa, the city which was once the capital from 1530 to 1843 of the História, India. A major departure of his research offers in his study of Indo-Portuguese architectural history is in its exclusive focus on the long history of one building, the Basilica of Bom Jesus. Many of us have attended the seminar which he organized on the subject a couple of months ago, which houses the relic of St. Francis, so as to understand the relationship between the famed monument and regional identity making of and in Goa. Currently, Professor Kandolkar is the program coordinator for the Master of Architecture in Urban Design at Goa College of Architecture. He's the winner of a number of awards, including Special Mention Jury Award for the International Competition of the Campus Design for School of Planning and Architecture at Vasant Kunj. I think that project is still in the making. He is also a gold medalist from Sept University, having won the Sir Patrick Geddes Award for the Best Architecture Student in Urban Design in 2007, and also the Vastu Shilpa Foundation Award for the Best Graduate Student of 2007. His writings on art, architecture, and cultural politics have been published in various forums, including Goan newspapers, and also peer-reviewed journals such as Economic and Political Weekly and Journal of Human Values. I'll now pass on the mic to Professor Kandolkar to make his first presentation.
Thank you so much for the generous introduction. I will share the screen. I hope the screen is visible to everybody. Yeah. Okay. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the presence of so many people who have tuned in to listen to this webinar. Thank you. Let me now take you on a short visual journey of one of the most important icons of Goan identity. The Basilica has been a part of living heritage of Goans for more than 400 years. In fact, the next exposition of St. Francis Xavier's relics will be held in 2024, which will mark 400 years since the transfer of the saint's body to Bom Jesus. But what is special about Bom Jesus is that the community associated with it continues to use the church on a day-to-day basis as a place of worship, even as it is a repository of the remains of a saint. The church is a part of the lived and living heritage of local community and the region. It is not a relic of the past alone, and this is where it becomes very interesting. Therefore, the authorities and stakeholders responsible for its care needs to pay special attention such that the building continues to enjoy a long afterlife. However, most debates about its conservation are driven by sentiments, unfound sentiments sometimes, especially the aesthetics of the exposed laterite stone, which is undergoing steady deterioration. Moving away from mere sentiments on how the basilica should look, I'm saying look is in quote, that is, the conservation of the basilica requires a proper understanding of its architectural history, the fact that the external plaster was removed only about 60 years ago, but also more alarmingly, and this is important, is that to analyze how the effects of climate change are ravaging the monument as we speak. This is something which is new and which is, I think so, in fact, the ICOMOS last time in 2018 took a stand saying that the World Heritage Monuments are as it is in danger, but climate change is going to have an adverse effect and more things are going to happen to it. And this is something which makes Basilica even more vulnerable. The Basilica is a popular monument, no doubt, but is a particular image of the church, that the brown building that has captured the imagination of the current generation. How did this come to be? How did that brown church has come to get that image of that we see today? Although the Basilica of Bom Jesus is special because it houses the relics of the St. Francis Xavier, in the post-colonial period, the architecture of Bom Jesus additionally came to serve as a secular monument, a secular icon to promote Goa as a destination for tourism. Look at this picture here. Come to Goa for a pilgrimage or a holiday, says the Department of Tourism, which means this building is steadily being now promoted as a secular icon. Consider that the unplastered Bom Jesus was used as an icon to represent Goa in the floats at the Republic Day Parade in New Delhi as early as in 1967. Not coincidentally, the United Nations had declared 1967 as the International Year of Tourism. The popularity of the Bom Jesus is such that it continues to be used as icon to represent the state in the Republic Day parades, even in the recent times. As we can see in 2019, the building is still there. Contemporary souvenirs available for sale in tourist shops around Goa juxtapose wide variety of images meant to represent Goa. For example, in the souvenir on the left, the image of the brown Bom Jesus is combined with palm fringe sandy beach with a frolicking tourist. Such convenient superimposition in collage form of the image of a religious monument with frolicking tourist reveals the easy stereotype in which Goa is commoditized for tourism. Most importantly, observe that in the post-colonial period, the image of the brown unplastered basilica is everywhere, be it a popular souvenir or floats. What is forgotten is the fact that not so long ago, the basilica was whitewashed monument. Or is this a case of deliberately erasing the architectural history of this monument? Could it be that the brown basilica is being maintained as an exposed laterite monument simply because it had become popular as an icon for mostly those from outside Goa, that is, for tourists? While tourist corporations have commoditized the brown basilica, the real estate corporations are not far behind. Seen here is a miniaturized version of the brown basilica, a part of property developed by Mini India Park in Kevalusi. Essentially, even developers use the brown look of the basilica to sell Goa's land. Essentially, for the current Goan public, the brown basilica is the basilica because the image of this edifice in this form has been cultivated through popular media for more than half a century. This is the image of the famed building that is most living people in Goa would know, right? Look at the images in these two slides, which I'm showing right now. Everywhere we can see the brown facade and the brown building everywhere, right? Look, for instance, this is the backdrop which was done for welcoming the premier of Portuguese premier who came here, and CI had done this thing. So even in the backdrop, you could see the brown basilica which was there. Essentially, it is the icon, but even when it is the icon, it is the brown image of the basilica which gets spread across every document, popular media, backdrops, etc. Not surprisingly, the image of the brown church is so deeply ingrained in the memory of the current generation that the ex-rector, the former rector in 2016, was against it being plastered at that time because this move, he said, would hurt the sentiments of the people of Goa. This is despite the fact that for greater part of the architectural history, for the long history, that is for 4 centuries, the monument was plastered and whitewashed. In Goa, it was the Portuguese restorer Baltazar da Silva Castro, commissioned by Oliver Salazar, who ordered the removal of the plaster to expose the brown laterite stone surface of the church in the 1950s. This is also what something Professor Edgar had mentioned earlier. Despite the knowledge of Basilica's architectural history, there are appeals to quote, more modern ways to preserving and improving the deteriorating structure, modern ways, in order to maintain the brown look of the basilica. The brown look has become synonymous. It says we have to maintain the brown look. Such a nostalgic sentiment of holding on to a particular look of a basilica shows how powerfully representations can hold sway over the public. Such misguided sentiments of authorities threaten the survival of the monument, the very building they adore so much. One wonders if different outcome would have occurred had other images of the church been widely circulated. Images from the pre-1950s period, such as Sousa and Paul's. These are the images from Sousa and Paul's from 1890s. See the images here, for instance. Very briefly, in terms of history, the Basilica of Bom Jesus, as mentioned earlier by Professor Edgar Ribeiro, was constructed in 1594, that is 16th century, and the building is older than Taj Mahal, Taj Mahal's construction began only in 1632. The basilica was commissioned by a religious order of Jesuits and was built specially to house the relics of Saint Francis Xavier. Although Xavier's relics was brought to Goa in 1554, it was shifted to it in 1624, its time when he was canonized as a saint. In fact, Jesuits, who were generally known for their frugality in spending money, decided at the last moment to decorate the entire facade of the Bom Jesus with granite imported all the way from Bassein near Bombay. The import of the expensive material shows that Jesuits took extra effort to make the monument as special, which was befitting the status of the saint. Historian Paulo Varela Gomes maintains that the Bom Jesus has unique facade in the history of church architecture, Christian church architecture, and it's one of the outstanding monuments of architecture in India. Further, he adds that the lasting contribution of the Basilica is that it allowed local Goan artisans to domesticate European architectural and ornamental vocabulary to make it their own. Subsequently, we know that a lot of what is called Indo-Portuguese architecture in Goa has become, this became the experimenting ground through which Indo-Portuguese architecture elements could be taken elsewhere. Not only the artisans and labor involved in its constructions were local, but much of the material in which the church is built, such as the laterite stone and timber, were also sourced locally. While it is true that inspiration for the building's aesthetics might have come from Europe, the monument is as much part of local Goan heritage because the skills and labor of locals contributed to the construction and thereafter its maintenance for past 400 years. I think this is very important. Just to give you very brief outlay, the Basilica of Bom Jesus, what we see today is like, it's freestanding monuments, few of them, but it was one of the few monuments which survived the steady decline of old Goa, a city which had once the capital of Estado da India. This is one of the maps by Pedro Barreto de Resenda, which is done in a book. And at that time, it was a capital of a territory so large which spanned all the way from Cape of Good Hope in Africa to Macau in China. It was a huge territory. And all the riches were moving and flowing through Goa. And so-called the Basilica survived the ruination of this excellent city, which was built in old Goa. And despite the fact that, in 1759, the original benefactor, the powerful religious order of the Jesuits themselves were expelled. They were thrown out, and the building was handed over to locals for its care with the Goan Archdiocese. Essentially, what we can see that the then contemporaries building to the Bom Jesus, the grand complexes of St. Augustine's on one hand, they fell to ruins immediately after the expansion of all the other religious orders in 1835. Monuments which endure long afterlife, such as Bom Jesus, do so because they have been cared for and looked after. Other buildings have not, and clearly this has something to do with the saint and his exposition. For example, in 1862, a major restoration of the basilica was undertaken, including the addition of the key structural supports, which is the buttress walls, okay, which is shown in red here. The 3 supports were added to the northern wall, and roof was also redone. Now, this is a picture which shows that, which is a picture from 1890. We can see it is still whitewashed, but also the fact that in order to safeguard the building, alterations, additions, and restorations were done. And these were done not because the state thinks that why I need to protect these buildings, is because what happens is that in 1859, there was the biggest exposition which was held. And I want to show you a picture which was prior to 1862, which means when there are no buttresses on that side. Essentially, this is a William and Johnson picture which was taken and which is a part of the poster. Essentially, it is the pressure of people after they came in lots of large numbers to support their saint, to see the house of the saint, to visit the relics of the saint. It is after that it built a pressure to restore the monument. So in fact, if the Basilica of Bom Jesus lasts for so long, is because people actually come to adore the building itself, and it's public pressure. It's a common heritage. People who are trying to say that this is important heritage for them, that leads to the conservation of the basilica, even if it is through history. Sorry, moving to the next slide. Look at this evidence here, and I want to give a few slides. This is before restoration. This is the 1835 picture, aerial view of the basilica. We can see that it's being plastered, just for records. There is another one here, which is just prior to the 1850 exposition. Again, the details of the restoration in 52 is going to be something which Dr. Joaquim Santos is going to take more and discuss more about what happened at the time, why was it being done, etc. I'm not going to speak more on that. But nevertheless, to make my position clear, I would argue that the so-called restoration of the Bom Jesus in the 1950s was problematic and should not be considered as buildings original state by any figment of imagination. Think again, the monument was built in the 16th century, and the alteration which affected the Bom Jesus was only carried out in the 20th century, which means 4 centuries later. Today, when we reflect on the history of the church as a brown monument belonging to so-called Portuguese period of Goa, it amounts to reducing the 4 centuries of monument's history as being monolithic. We tend to reduce that whole time saying, okay, we took over the monument, India took over the monument in this state, and therefore it should be retained in their original state. No, I think there's some problem in conceiving in that sense, which requires revisiting. Importantly, the recent outcry of public following the April 2020 rain, which damaged the Basilica, the community has been playing an important role in understanding the architectural history of Bom Jesus. There's been several meetings. In fact, the rector of the Basilica, Father Patricio Fernandes, who raised the issue reproaching the Architectural Survey of India of utter neglect, has been active in observing and documenting the deterioration of the monument, which has been worsening over time. We can see that. Perhaps just like the pressure which public built in 1859, which led to the restoration of the Basilica, which means those buttress walls were put. The open letter which the rector has began, which was began in 2020, is this part of the debate which is continuing now, and which will mark another moment which will draw the attention of all the authorities and the government and urge them into action to save the monument. One of the most important factors that need consideration is how the exposed stone is going to stand the environmental degradation. Now, this is something which has not been often spoken about. The effects of climate change on heritage in general, but effects of climate change on our basilica in particular. A prospect made dire by over time. I was looking at some of the numbers, and the numbers shows that the monsoons, the annual monsoons, affairs in South Asia, monsoons are there every year, right? And our monuments are supposed to outstand and live and have a long afterlife. But data shows that over last 100 years, there has been 68% increase in the quantum of rain Goa has had received in last 100 years. Now, 68% is a huge number, which means that the monuments will have to withstand higher amount of downpour of rain than before, wherein the surface will need to be protected from erosion. Ill effects of climate change mean environmental pollutants, additionally because of urbanization, increase in air pollutants, etc., added with some kind of increase in temperatures will lead to what is called sometimes called as acid rains and other effects, which I'm sure Professor Delgado Rodrigues will speak more about in later presentation. All these things are going to have adverse effect on Basilica. They're having adverse effect on general heritage, stone buildings, but on Basilica, it's going to be severe because of the type of stones that we are dealing here, which is laterite. Now, usually a lime-based plaster, okay, or lime-based render, as it is often called in the technical terms, is supposed to serve as a sacrificial layer. It's a layer which is supposed to protect the monument, which means it's a layer which is supposed to take all the beatings of the environment from outside. If the layer is falling down, we say, look at the building, which is really going, but it's that layer between the stone inside and the environment outside. The lime-based plaster is supposed to take that beating. It's supposed to be that layer which can be sacrificed. Delgado will speak more about stone, even hard stones, which are exposed to environment degradations, what can happen to them. In fact, if at all, I would say it is a Xaverian miracle that exposed laterite walls of Basilica have withstood the onslaught of Goan monsoons in 1950s. And the afterlife of the saint has been intrinsically linked to the church erected to cradle his remains. And Goans hope the Basilica of Bom Jesus will which will continue to stand, and we take care of some of these issues. Just to point, even this north side wall is undergoing degradation. But again, one more proof, you can see the inside lining, which is whitewashed of the courtyard here on the left. All this is a proof that, the whitewashed basilica is continuing to be a beautiful basilica, make no mistake. Aesthetically, it doesn't really bring down to any extent, any kind of aesthetic. Somebody will say, okay, the whitewash is a common thing, but no, it is still beautiful. In fact, if you go, I think so Lester, who has given some of the pictures, have created really a very good pictures of this place, especially the whitewashed walls, which are there, lime-based plaster. Nevertheless, this is a kind of a comic effect, which often has been spoken by Slavoj Zizek. It's like when we don't see it through lens. In this case, I urge people to see through two lens. Lens of history, which means what was the plaster for most amount of time. When we wear the lens, when we wear the spectacles, which tell us that, throughout history it was plastered. What's wrong in seeing it plastered? We understand the importance. But also now, I think increasingly what I'm going to champion now is to see it through the lens of environmental science and effects of global climate change, which are going to be severe on Goa. And I think so Pachori made a statement not long ago that Goa is going to be one of the worst, worst in terms of really coping with climate change. So in that sense, I would request everybody to rethink about the way in which the thing has to see, and also then circulate and think about circulation of our monuments, because I began by showing you all how popular culture creates a particular kind of look, and that look gets fixed into our memory. We forget how it was in the past. So also what we require is knowledge about how representations of how when the building is represented in a particular way, it gets embedded into the common public memory of people, and that also requires certain kind of enlightenment, which I'm sure will happen. Lastly, last point that I would want to make is the common meeting which Father Patricio had organized for the volunteers of Basilica, and they when they had come. And one of the interesting questions which I got was that maybe if the southern wall is in danger, why don't we put new buttress walls to save it? What I got to know by interacting with the concerns of volunteers of the Basilica, I think what they are far less concerned about the aesthetics of the local Goans, and local volunteers are far less concerned of the aesthetics of the Basilica. They want a monument which cradles the remains of the saint to be saved at all cost, irrespective of how it looks. And it's the authorities, it's the people who are in charge of safeguarding this Basilica of the future who need to take action. So thank you so much for having me. I would like to just give a quick shout out to all those people who have contributed towards, directly or indirectly, Joaquim, Benny, Fernando Velio, Savia Vegas, Lester, among others. So thank you so much. And I would request Professor Edgar to move to the next speaker.
Thank you, Vishvesh, for that excellent start. The presentation was very good, and we'll sum up at the end. We'll go to our next speaker, Dr. Joaquim Rodrigues dos Santos. He's a very familiar face in Goa, but we are missing him due to COVID is creating all these problems. But we are glad that we're able to interact with him. He's a very eminent researcher and invited professor at ARTIS, the Institute of Art History, University of Lisbon. A very major project of his is safeguarding of Portuguese-influenced heritage in India, and that he's doing with the University of Lisbon and Goa University. Joaquim has a PhD in architecture from the University of Alcalá in Spain. That was in 2012. And his thesis then was the rehabilitation of medieval fortifications. He has an M.Arch from the famous University of Coimbra, 2007. And in the area of architecture, territory, and memory, that's a very nice subject. And his dissertation then was what creation of cultural images that have influenced the restoration of monuments. He graduated before that in architecture from the University of Coimbra in 2002. And even then, his specialization was conservation and restoration of monuments and historical sites. He did that at the Federal University of Bahia in Brazil, 2006. Joaquim is a founder member of the Institute for Research and Development at the Lusophone University of Cape Verde, 2012-13. He's coordinator of the research project of the Oratorians in Ceylon. This is a very strong Goan connection, our saint from Goa. Survey of the Oratorian churches with Portuguese influence in Sri Lanka. The manor houses on Portugal, Brazil, and Goa, and several other projects. He is an invited editor of the ARTIS Journal for Art, History, and Heritage Sciences, an author of an editor of numerous books and scientific articles, including the book Heritage at Crossroads, Essays on the Preservation of Goa's Architectural Treasures. His main research areas are on the history of cities and architecture and the preservation and management of built heritage, with a special focus on the Portuguese influence transcultural heritage of South Asia. The main topic, which under the broad head, Architecture as Propaganda, the restoration of the Basilica of Bom Jesus in the late Portuguese period. Over to you, Dr. Joaquim Rodrigues dos Santos.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all in Portugal. Good evening to our friends in India. It is indeed a pleasure to be here and sharing this theme, especially because the first time I went to Goa, when I spoke about the replastering of the Basilica, it was just something polemic and came into the newspapers. So now the fact that we are now discussing this, it's how we advance in the terms of the conservation of the Basilica. Without let me share my presentation. So I will talk about the restoration of the Basilica in the late Portuguese period. So everything this problem just started with the independence of India in 1947. After that, there were some claims over the territories under the Portuguese and French administration, and the Portuguese dictatorship. On that time, it was a dictatorship, nationalist dictatorship. Just tried to find a way to maintain the public opinion on the side of the Portuguese claims, which were the maintenance of the Goa Dam and Dio under the Portuguese administration. So there was a propaganda across the world to say that the Portuguese territories were no longer colonies, or were not colonies, but overseas territories. And this propaganda was spreading all over the world. And it was important to show that the Portuguese presence in Goa was indeed very old, and Goa had a very Western way of life. It was important to show that the Goans were mostly Catholics. The architecture was almost European architecture, and these issues intended to prove that Goa was closer to Portugal than India. So the Portuguese regime, as used to do in Portugal, just used public events and monuments as ideological instruments for their propaganda. In 1952, a major celebration was to happen in Goa, which was the 4th centennial of St. Francis Xavier's death. And therefore, the Portuguese regime just used this celebration to show the world how Goa was so close to Portugal, so close in a way of life, in religion, in architecture, and all these themes. The same happened in Portugal, actually. The Portuguese regime was nationalist and just used celebrations as ideological instruments. Here we can see the castle of São Jorge in Lisbon during a celebration. So monuments and celebrations, major celebrations, were used by the Portuguese regime, the Estado Novo. And monuments were indeed heavily restored. Many of them were heavily restored. We can see here the Palace of the Dukes in Guimarães, previous and after the restoration, and this image shows how it was and after the restoration. So it was almost an invented monument after the restoration. This was supposed to host the President of Portugal. So the GEM was the institution who used to deal with these heritage issues in Portugal, the restorations. And we can see here, among several other features, one of the things that the Portuguese restorers used to do was the removal of the plaster. We can see here in this church in Travanca, how the plaster was removed from the surface of the church. And here again, in Santarém, the plaster was removed. Not only in all buildings, but in some buildings, this was a common practice. It was not only in outside, in the outside part of the churches, but also in the inside parts. We can see here how the plaster was removed, and inclusively the Baroque art pieces were removed to show a medieval church. This is in Trancoso and here in near Amarante. So by doing this, it was supposedly recovered the original image of the church when it was built. So everything was what was added after during the centuries was just removed, leaving only what was supposedly the original church. And this was here at the left was the main responsible for this kind of actions, architect Baltasar da Silva Castro. Until 1949, he was a main head restorer in the GEM, but then his restorations start to be criticized. And therefore, in 1949, he just abandoned the GEM and went to the overseas ministry to work there in the overseas territories. And this famous restorer, the person chosen by the Portuguese regime to work in the restorations of Goa, the monuments of Goa, preparing them for the centennial of the St. Francis Xavier death. So in 1950, Baltasar Castro arrived for the first time to Goa, and he immediately started to work on the restoration of the monuments. Inclusively, he made a protection area, we can see here, for the monuments in Goa. Baltasar Castro just did what he was used to do in Portugal. He just applied in old Goa the same techniques as he used to do in Portugal. For instance, here we can see one of the main issues he used to do was to remove the plaster. The cross in front of the Church of St. Francis of Assisi, the plaster was just removed, as you can see here. And the same happened in the Chapel of St. Catherine. If you can see, the plaster was removed from the pilasters, from the fronton, and in several other elements were just eliminated. This was to give an appearance of something older than it really was. It was believed that this would be the initial image of the chapel. Also, we know that it was not true. This would be exactly the original shape. Anyway, Baltasar Castro was sure that by doing this, he was showing the original image. Inclusively, the back part of the chapel was demolished. We can see here, all this was demolished was the house of the priest, and then rebuilt again. But by doing that, he rebuilt using the same stones, but he left unplastered. Inclusively, Baltasar Castro added this medieval cross here, which was not existing in Goa. This is something new from Baltasar Castro. This kind of church, this kind of crosses exist in many medieval Portuguese churches, but not in Goa. It's not used in Goa. Anyway, Baltasar Castro just used this and make this narrow window, which is almost medieval. By doing this, he was showing, inclusively inside, how old was this church. And by showing how old were the churches, was at the same time showing how old was the Portuguese presence in Goa. And this is exactly our main subject today, the Basilica. So in 1951, 1952, during the study mission led by Mario Chicó, the Basilica was indeed plastered. You can see here it was not whitewashed very well. Maybe the photo was after the monsoon, but it was plastered for sure. And Baltasar Castro, the first action was to remove some of the soil. The former level was here, and all this was excavated. And he found the laterite which was not in a good condition. So he thought it would be better to allow the stone to breathe by removing the plaster. And more than that, without the plaster showing the stone, the basilica would look older, exactly like the Portuguese churches. It would look also almost as a medieval, with a medieval image. That's why we used to have, this image before the restoration, and after the restoration, it became like this, completely different. This would show how old was this basilica, almost as the medieval buildings in Portugal. And this is another view. A new cross was also built by Baltasar Castro on that time. And once again, we can see the crosses here are crosses used in the medieval period in Portugal. Again, Baltasar Castro was showing the oldness of this basilica. If need, something, the history was recreated to show how this was old. And this is what we have today. I'm showing you this arch because it's very important to understand the danger of removing the plaster. The Arch of the Viceroys was, until the arrival of Baltasar Castro, like this, plastered. Contrarily to what people used to say, the intervention of Baltasar Castro was just to remove the plaster and to excavate the soil. So the original soil was through here, and he found the original pathway by excavating everything. He excavated this, and this was supposed to be the arch after the restoration. What happens is that only 8 days, I suppose it was 8 days after the removal of the plaster, after the finishing of the restoration, the Arch of the Viceroys, the monsoon came and the arch just collapsed. We can see here that it was this shape. And the arch collapsed. Here is the image of St. Catherine. And Baltasar Castro started to be criticized, heavily criticized in Goa. So he moved away to Portugal again and never returned to Goa. The restoration, this shows how fragile became the arch without plaster. It remained there for more than 4 centuries, and then the first time the plaster was removed, the arch just collapsed, only because it was without plaster. So the arch was then restored, and now it seems almost like a triumphal arch, but it's not the original image. The original image was like this. In 1959, the last Portuguese Governor General commissioned a commission, if I can say, the Commission of Velha Goa, which was led by José Ismael Garcias, to make a restoration plan for Goa. Again, in 1960, there was a new major celebration in Portugal, the 500 years of the death of Prince Henry the Navigator. And with this event, it was possible to connect Portugal with the overseas territories. And in Goa, also the 450 years of the Portuguese conquest of Goa by Alfonso de Albuquerque. So there was a huge intention of making a restoration, reintegration of the city of Goa. It was again the Portuguese dictatorship using heritage and major events as an ideological propaganda instrument. The plan existed. Some of the things were actually built, like here. This is the terrace of St. Francis Xavier. And another architect from the then came to Portugal, came to Goa, architect Luís Benavente. He was also a GEMS technician, and he came to Goa to work in the monuments. So he was for some months in Goa working in the restoration of the monuments. And I found in the Portuguese National Archive a report ordering the replastering of the basilica. So this report was saying that it is absolutely necessary to proceed with works to the safeguarding of the basilica for the future, not only the image of this monument, but also the durability of the construction. The works done some years ago by Baltasar Castro, which was the removal of the plaster, without any consistency, allowed the basilica to be deprived from its outside plaster, ignoring the own characteristics of the existing material, the lateritis. It was clear the complete loss of the architectural expression of the monument. In a short period of a few years, only 8 years, from 1952 until 1960, it was possible to verify the action of the weather on the laterite stone. So in 8 years, it was possible to see how the stone was disaggregating. Now, 60 years passed. The condition is its worst. And in the end of the report, Luís Benavente just said that this subject is very sad and one should not insist on it. Therefore, let's get to work by recovering the basilicas outside to its original image. This is to replaster and whitewash again the basilica. The report was made in 12 November 1961, but it was not possible to plaster again the basilica. Actually, 1 month later, there was the liberation of Goa, and so the Portuguese technicians just came back to Portugal. The basilica stands by like this, as we know today, but possibly if the liberation took place about a couple of months, 3 months, 4 months later, it would be possible that the basilica would be seen now like this. The plaster would be replaced again. But this is very important. because as Delgado Rodrigues will talk after, the laterite is a very fragile stone and need to be protected. And by saying protection is to be plastered. We can see here the fails in this stone. Actually, the laterite without any protection will become something like this, but I will not talk about this. We can see here, this is the stone which was brought from a basin, and it is exquisite. The carvers are very exquisite. Here in laterite, the carvings are just rough, and they are rough just because it was supposed to be plastered. Anyway, we can see how this stone, the laterite stone, is disintegrating by comparing with this hard stone. So the replastering of the basilica with lime plaster and whitewashed would allow not only to protect the laterite stone and to conserve the basilica, but this is also important. This would allow to recover the pristine image, the original image of the basilica. And by doing this, it's possible to recover the visual authenticity of the basilica, because the basilica was built to be seen in white in contrast with this dark stone, not like this. We can see Vishvesh already showed some of the images. For all the story of the basilica, the basilica was always plastered until 1952. You can see here without the buttresses. Here in a drawing from 1863, it was plastered, as you can see. Again, in 1819, the basilica was plastered. In a drawing from 1872, it was also plastered. 1878, sorry, it was plastered. In 1932, it was plastered, and we already saw that in the study mission from Mario Chicot. In 1951, it was also plastered. And we can see here, this is the Jesuit Church of Bassin, and it's possible to see how the image would be. You can see here the carved stone and the contrast with the whitewashed, the walls plastered and whitewashed. This was an intention to do this contrast. And in Goa, in the basilica, there was also an intention by doing the difference between the whitewashed and the dark stone. This is just to show one thing. This is Piodon, a historical village in Portugal, and we can see all most of the houses are built in stone, shale stone. However, the most important the most important building of the village is with plaster and whitewashed. And this is because in the old times in Portugal, only people with money and major institutions used to use the lime plaster, because it was expensive. So the church was the most important building in this village, and therefore it was plastered to show the importance. You can see here how beautiful this church is. And this happened with the palaces and with churches in Portugal. The idea that these churches were also deplastered without plaster is not a correct idea. So imagine, for instance, Percival Noronha, who knew very well Baltasar Castro, told me that after the basilica, it was supposed to be the remotion of the plasters from the cathedral. So the cathedral was supposed to be deplastered after the basilica. But what happened is that the arch of the viceroys just collapsed, and there was no time to deplaster this. Imagine that it happened the arch would not collapse, and this basilica, the cathedral was indeed deplastered. This would be the image that we would have today. So is it the real image? What would happen for Goan people by looking this? Would they defend the maintenance of this image, or would they defend the replaster again and whitewash of the cathedral? This is just a question that we need to thought, because it's important to the basilica is a Indian monument, but at the same time is also a monument from the world. And it is something very important for the Goan to maintain, to conserve something from the whole world. You can choose to maintain it like this, without plaster for 50 years, or with plaster recovering the original authenticity and to last for 5 centuries, for instance. So these are the questions that we need to analyze now. And with that, I'm finishing. Thank you very much to all for hearing me. And Edgar, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquim, for that excellent presentation. Since we last met, you have done an enormous amount of extra research, which is going to be of great use to us. And I was particularly interested when you referred to a friend of mine, architect Basilica. He was there because I took over planning functions from him when I came here in 1964 to set up the Department of Planning. He was handling planning apart from being an excellent architect, but that is just by the way. So thanks very much. So we have first had an architect with an urban design background. Now we have had art, architecture, and history. And now we're going to have a very interesting speaker who is coming, who has not yet visited Goa, and we hope an opportunity is given to him to visit us very often. Dr. José Delgado Rodrigues. He's a geologist, and he's very down to earth. His subject is what to expect from stones exposed to harsh environmental conditions. So he has a very interesting CV. Dr. José Delgado Rodrigues is a graduate in geology from the University of Coimbra in 1967. Sorry, I mean, do we go back to? So, yeah. With a thesis was on rock weathering in engineering geology, application to Portuguese case studies. He's a principal research officer of the National Laboratory of Civil Engineering. He's the president of the same Laboratory Scientific Council, an invited professor of New University of Lisbon, 2000 to 2006. He's director of the Department of Geotechnique at the National Laboratory of Civil Engineering, Secretary General of the International Society for Rock Mechanics, that's very interesting, 91 to 2003, President of the Portuguese Society of Geotechnique, 1989 to 93. He's Scientific International Permanent Committee for the Organization of Congress on Degradation and Conservation of Stone. He's a member of the, this is very interesting, member of the Permanent Scientific Committee of World Monument Fund, in Portugal, 1994 up to the present time. And he's acted as invited professor in courses of several universities in Portugal and abroad, mentor researcher at the Getty Conservation Institute, scientific coordinator of Charisma, international course on stone conservation, and member of the editorial board of Journal of Cultural Heritage, Geotechnical and Geological Engineering, Materials and Construction, Journal of International Heritage, Conservation, Analysis and Restoration of Buildings and Monuments. That's an excellent combination. And I wish we had someone of his caliber even in our Archaeological Survey of India, because it's a fantastic combination. And we are greatly looking forward now to his presentation, What to Expect from Stones Exposed to Harsh Environmental Conditions. Over to Dr. José Delgado Rodrigues.
Thank you, Professor Ribeiro. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope to be helpful for helping you to decide what to do with this magnificent monument that the Portuguese are proud of, but of course, it is also World Heritage Monument, and all of us should give our best to help you to conserve it. So I will speak in very generic terms about the situation. I would like to start just by summarizing that when deciding on these situations, we have mainly two types of arguments. One is certainly based on the history, on the perceptions, and similar, so values of this kind, architecture, and so on. And certainly there is a group of arguments that come from the conservation side. So, and that is what I will try to speak about, certainly in generic terms, since I have never been in Goa, and I don't know exactly the situation. So, as we all know, all stones undergo deterioration when they are exposed, whatever the type of stone, from sandstone to limestones, even granites and volcanic rocks, all of them decay when they are exposed. So this is a natural phenomenon, and it is also true that some decay much faster than others. That's the reality, and it's a perception that we all have, that we can find some stones very hard and durable, while others are soft and decay very, very fast. So the deterioration rates depend on the stone itself. This is the first thing that you have to bear in mind. It's that different stones behave differently. The composition, the texture, whatever that characterize the stone may influence the rate, the speed at the surface decays. But it also depends on the environmental conditions. That means if we are in a humid or dry climate, for instance, if in Egypt we have stones that are there for 3,000 years in extremely good condition, while in temperate and hot weather climates, they decay very fast. So similar stones in different climates weather very differently. But it also depends if the stone is placed outside the building or inside. If it is exposed or sheltered means that it gets rain directly, or if it has a bench or something over protecting it from the rain. So that many things that we can call the environmental conditions, that the scale depends, if a regional scale, a scale of the building, even a micro scale of a wall. So this means that there are not a rule that defines a situation for everything. So each case is a different case, and even the same stone in the same monument depends on the place where it is exposed. So the conditions are really very different, and it is impossible to state something very general, applicable to any stone, anywhere, everywhere. And of course, time is also must be taken into account. It is an important factor, but it is also meaning when it is analyzed together with the other factors, as I have mentioned before. So the type of stone and the environmental conditions. I give you here two examples of two structures of a similar epoch. One made of schist, so a real stone from the Roman time in a temperate climate, and it is heavily decayed, so destroyed. Most of the stone is destroyed. On the right side, you can see a wall made of mud and straw from a similar age, but still keeping a shape because it is in a desert environment. So really the climate, the situation where they are placed, have a very strong influence on the final performance of the structure. So when we have high temperatures and humid conditions, these conditions tend to accelerate the decay rates. And one of the first signs of it is the intense biocolonization that usually accompanies the aggressive environments. Such here, this is in Portugal, and one is over granite and another is over marble. But the intense biocolonization that comes due to the temperate temperatures and wet conditions. So about Goa, what can we say in generic terms that can be helpful to understand what is going on and what can be done in this monument? So the first is the stone itself. What is the stone, the main stone used here? So it is a laterite. Laterite is a very peculiar stone. The stone itself is derived from the weathering of previous stones. So it is a stone produced in certain climates, especially in very wet and very hot weather, and that resists to the decay, and it's kept there. So, but because the process of formation is very specific, the stone gets a very peculiar texture and composition. It usually is very heterogeneous. These are some examples taken from photos given by Joaquim Rodrigues dos Santos, and that clearly show that the stone itself is very heterogeneous. So with very big holes, very porous, and with really some parts that are very hard, but with other parts that are soft. So this combination is really not easy to take care. So some laterite blocks, as some have already shown, they exhibit low performance with a strong deterioration and heavy decay rates. So it is visible that the stone has an appearance that is crumbling and the sanding the pieces that are being lost at an appreciate rate. So the mass loss may be significant. And since it is very heterogeneous, the result is certainly not homogeneous as well. So the result would be a very irregular surface. So when stones deteriorate and show mass losses, what can we do? So what are the measures that usually can be done to solve or to counteract? So it can be repaired locally. So apply something locally in very small points when the loss is local. There's some local mass losses or other, or scales or fractures or whatever. So that's things that we can do. But when the deterioration is heavier, we have to repair heavily. So we have to do something very more intrusive. So it may include, for instance, the replacement of blocks. So when the surface, when really exposed, well, the stone is exposed and is to be left exposed, we have to face things, to consider things that may include the replacement of blocks. Or another situation that is very common is to protect it with a sacrificial layer, so as for a plaster. So the application of the sacrificial layer is not only for historical purposes. It may be a conservation measure. It has to be understood that in this situation. So besides the arguments that can be addressed on historical terms, on image terms, it is also seen, it has to be seen also as a conservation action, conservation measure to protect. So in the Bom Jesus Basilica, very likely, so what I would expect here is that locally repair by consolidation, for instance, that is a measure that is frequently applied, is very likely unsuitable because the stone will not react well with consolidation. So consolidation is a very peculiar way of counteracting the deterioration, but it has very specific situations to be applied. It cannot be applied to every stone everywhere. Some stones accept consolidation while others do not accept it. And I presume, I do not know exactly how the laterite will react, but I presume that it will not react well to consolidation. So consolidation will not give a good service to conservation in laterite. This is what I expect. I cannot be sure. I have never tested it. So certainly some studies can be done and tests can be made, but this is my working hypothesis. So on the other hand, if it is not possible to consolidate, means that the mass, the erosion will continue. And if it continues, at a certain point, the repair has to be heavy. And the repair by replacement has to be considered. And replacement of blocks is always very expensive. So this is what, these are the two I'd say actions that certainly could be applied if the stone is to be exposed. So one is probably not adequate, and another one is expensive. It's very expensive, and besides require a very well-trained personnel, and so heavy installations to be workable. So another way is protect it with a rendering layer, as already been mentioned. And this is a traditional practice and well adapted to present conditions. So this is a traditional craft procedure that is at the reach of the local workers, I'm sure, with a certain supervision of a conservation trained person responsible for it. This can be done easily with the local workers. So, of course, meanwhile, I would suggest monitoring, so to do it in a careful way. So it can be done by photographs periodically, just to follow what's going on in certain blocks in zones where the deterioration is heavier, and follow it to accompany the evolution and decide according to what is being done. So these are my considerations, what I could think about this situation. And of course, I'm open to further this discussion. And I thank you for listening, for inviting me, for having me with this in this seminar. I'm very pleased to contribute to the decision if I can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rodrigues. It was an excellent, to the point presentation, just like the others. And here you have sent us a message that protection may give you the best option. So I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, and thank you for the presentation. I'll go now to our final speaker, Dr. Fleur de Souza. A very interesting topic, and that is, how did a 440-year-old Paris church get a new lease of life? It's located outside the Greater Bombay Municipal Corporation area, but Thana is itself a municipal corporation. So this is a fantastic presentation of people's participation. Fleur is a graduate with history honors from St. Xavier's College. Then she has a bachelor's in education and master's in history from the University of Bombay, and a doctorate in history from the same university, with a thesis being Thana under the Portuguese, 1534 to 1737. She has been the head of the Department of History at St. Xavier's College. It's a very important department from 1996 to 2016, and vice principal of the arts faculty 2005 to 11. In 2014, she was appointed to head the Bachelor of Vocation in Tourism at St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. Within a team, she researched, planned, and conducted heritage walks, a very popular topic now and much sought after even in Goa and all over. She did that for the citizens of Mumbai, and I know in Mumbai they are very interested in these walks to celebrate the bicentennial of the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. She is also on the Archdiocese of Mumbai's Heritage Cell. It's very interesting that one of the various support cells the Archdiocese of Mumbai has is a Heritage Cell. That's excellent. and she worked with the team on the timeline of the history and heritage of the Archdiocese of Bombay in Goregaon, Mumbai. She was also a member of the first Academic Council of the Maritime History Society of the Indian Navy, 2016 to 19, and an Executive Council member of the Oral History Association of India. She served as academic expert on the team planning a heritage gallery, Dorahar from Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders. Her academic interest lies in maritime history, community history, urban and colonial history, and church history and heritage. That's a fantastic combination for a great lover of heritage, and we are very glad and to have her to speak to us and tell us about her experiences, more of a participatory program on this Paris church, whether straight away they say, for friend of ours, Dilwara, I mean, he told them, look, this is older than the Taj Mahal, and that was enough to get the citizens together. Thank you, and I pass the floor on to her.
Thank you so much for those very, very kind words. I will not take much time and go very, very quickly so as to leave you time to engage with the other very, very eminent speakers on this panel. So I'll very quickly go through my sharing of my PowerPoint. Yeah, is that okay, Vishvesh?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to say restore, repair, renovate. We really don't know what word to use when we set about our little journey to repair and restore this 440-year-old church. Incidentally, to this year, 2021, marks the 440th year when the foundation stone of this church was laid. This little presentation involves the community, and it is especially the parish church of St. John the Baptist, Thane. Now, we all know that governments generally privilege national heritage or structures with tourist appeal. And awareness of this heritage must include community. I would very specifically say that the role of the church hierarchy and laity in the preservation of the patrimony of the archdiocese of this country. In 2007, Bombay set up the CPPA-HPC, another word for the Archdiocesan Commission for the Preservation and Promotion of the Artistic and Historic Patrimony of the Church. And there are several challenges that we will be talking about. A little bit of background history. Here is a 16th century text that refers to the establishment of the Franciscan church at Thana. The Franciscans believed that the site of this church was rather sacred because one of their members was martyred here 700 years ago. In fact, on the 9th of April will be the 700th anniversary of the martyrdom of what are called the Thana martyrs, the earliest Franciscan martyrs in this country, and one of the first encounters that India had with the Catholic Church 200 years before the Portuguese set sail here. So it's a very historic moment for Thana as we celebrate the 700th anniversary. So the Franciscans held Thana to be very important, and that is why you have many documents talking about the foundation of this church. He says, once upon a time, not far from the town of Thana, there was a very large tank. The Franciscans had a small convent, usually inhabited by 10 friars. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see before our efforts at conservation, layers of oil paint on this beautiful stone arch. I don't know what Jose will say about what oil paint does to this stone, but Painstakingly, layers and layers of oil paint were removed, and this is what we see after even the date. The date here is 1666, and when the oil paint was removed, it is 1668. In 76, the church was in a very dilapidated condition, says Jerson de Cunha, and many times during the last 400 years, there have been renovations to the church that are absolutely unnecessary. Now, I think that building up of heritage consciousness is very important. So movements from below, parishioners, Catholic journalists, writers, and a growing band of students of history, archaeology, and art took a keen interest in heritage in the last 20 years. And Mumbai is the first city in India to have legislation for heritage conservation. The heritage regulations for Greater Bombay came in 1995. So, there was a law to protect. These are some of the images of the church before we restored it in 2021. Heavy oil paint on the stone arches, bad plaster peeling, the roof in disrepair, big patches of moisture could be seen on the walls, and it was a real horrible sight. To me, I think stakeholders have a right to know that experts warn of further deterioration. In 2004, Vikas was called in by a few parishioners as a personal request to assess the damage. And his report said, this is in 2004, this church is older than the Taj Mahal. This line has often caught the imagination of people and is repeated. Now, today we have a number of architects and contractors that specialize in the repair of heritage, but this was not there 20 years ago. A series of articles in the Parish Bulletin and in the Examiner, we clarified the terms repair, restoration. People believed that we were going back to the old views of the church, but that was not possible. The church had been renovated many times, and certain interventions just could not be reversed. So we had to clarify the terms repair, restoration, renovation, conservation. It took a decade. Parishioners were persuaded to move to a temporary shed for the duration of the project. The parish finance committee had to be brought over. Permissions from the Thane Municipal Corporation, and their non-existent heritage cell, which is different from the Mumbai Municipal Corporation. So there were many, many, many challenges along the way. One thing we did was build up an interest in heritage by engaging with the community. And we feel that if the community engages in the past, appraises it, learns from it, identifies with it, and feels a sense of ownership, and then they feel a sense of ownership and belonging. So this is a picture of an experiment with a heritage walk before the renovation. The person with his back to the camera was our parish priest, Father Olvin de Silva, who is now bishop, and still a great supporter of our efforts. Challenges, financial, space constraints. See, the older churches served smaller local populations in the past. Look at Mumbai, it's the most populous city. There was a felt need for bigger spaces in the burgeoning city. Migrant populations into Bombay have little or no sentiments and don't connect with the things of the past. They want to see convenience. They want to see clean floors. They want to see painted walls. They want to see shiny fittings. So it was very difficult to consolidate some of the ideas that we had. We have many builder parish priests who love to leave inscriptions and plaques and change things. One of the parish priests wanted to break down the sides of the sanctuary and make it a cruciform pattern, which we were thoroughly against. The challenges, few architects and contractors skilled woodscraftsmen and gilders are too expensive, environmental factors, and the idea of, look at this. In 1981, this picture shows that the altars were blue and gold and white. In 1995, the parish priest has the altars renovated, and you have every color put on the carved Baroque reredos, retablo. Magenta, orange, gold, green, purple, multicolors put. So there were many going to restoring, repairing, and seeing this church to give it a new lease of life. We had to provide photographs that the architect had something to go by. The parishioners were very keen to replicate this doorway, which suddenly disappeared in the 1964 renovation of the church. So please remember that people do not have many pictures inside the church because it's expensive to have pictures. So gently the pictures of the weddings, etc., were taken outside the church. This is a 1961 picture of a wedding, and these doors have disappeared. We don't know where they are. These are all pictures showing the interiors of the church. On the left-hand side, this is from 1935. On the altar here, you have a painting of the martyrdom of the Thana martyrs, which was hanging there and has subsequently disappeared. We don't know where. And this is the colorful altars were a 1995 edition. It is my submission today that collective responses must be engaged with. There lies value in involving local stakeholders and incorporating their memories in any project which seeks to preserve heritage. We have to take stakeholders into confidence, and especially regarding, and therefore the seminar that Goa College of Architecture and ARTIS have organized today goes a long way into truly bringing to people the true state of repair and disrepair and its consequences. Our architect wanted to replaster the external walls, and that is what he did. He went right down to special karigars all the way from Rajasthan who are specialized in doing lime plaster, and he replastered the walls. This is what the church looks like today from the outside. This is what it looks like from the inside. The Sequeira brothers, Mingleshwar and Benzoni from Vasai, they are expert gilders and sculptors. They have been treating the wooden retables of the heritage churches of the region for years, and they are often called upon to use their expertise on the profuse wooden ornamentation that typifies the Indo-Portuguese churches of the north. Now, by their own admission, they said, we do as we are commissioned. So the parish priests who are sole trustees will order them to do whatever they think is fit. And that is why it's very, very important to involve the community members in explaining to them very recently I had one of my parishioners telling me, oh, I visited the churches in Vasai and the gold is shining. So I phoned up Mingleshwar and I said, we have put original gold leaf on our altars. And why is this lady saying that the gold in Vasai is shining? He says, ma'am, those churches are painted over with POP and oil and gold paint and not pure gold leaf. So people want to see shiny, new, they want to see renovation. Here you have after pictures. These are some of the scenes after. Our architect was very keen to find out if there was a stone vault behind this false ceiling. We did find a few stones there, but subsequently they have all fallen off. And somewhere along the way, a false wooden arch was replaced. Our efforts continue. We published a book in 2018, which detailed the process. We called it Witness. Very recently, during the lockdown, somebody came up with the idea, let's have Instagram posts. And so we came up with the idea that every week we will do one post, and we did this for 26 weeks, ending in the new year, where we started with A and we went up to Z. And each letter had a 300-word description of some aspect of the heritage and history of the church. So we had N for nave, we had P for pulpit, we had S for Solomonic columns, we had B for baroque. It's very interesting. Here you see Cardinal Gracious standing at the pulpit, which was used for the very, very first time when we inaugurated the church after the renovation, and people were very, very tickled with the idea of a pulpit being used as a pulpit. So we are trying our best to continue to reach out to people. Just in conclusion, the heritage churches of Mumbai are no dead sites, but dynamic living entities with local social and ritual usage. They illustrate a lived history. Preserving them is sometimes viewed as an assertion of cultural identity. Local stakeholders and their memories must be incorporated into the project if the preservation of the patrimony is to be sustained. I want to thank ARTIS. I want to thank Goa College of Architecture for this opportunity to share the experiences of a small parish community in preserving its heritage. And I leave you with this thought of Vikas Dilavri. He says, it's good not because it's old, it is old because it is good. So this parish church has lasted 440 years, and next year we will be celebrating 440 years of its establishment. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry for the confusion in the beginning. Yeah, over to you, Vikas. Over to you, Vishvesh.
Professor Ribeiro, over to you.
So thank you, Fleur, for this excellent presentation. And it was worth waiting for it because you gave us a very good insight on how through local participation such works could be undertaken.
I think that meanwhile, while we are waiting for some questions, maybe Professor Ribeiro can give us some notes, not finishing notes, but some notes about the other three presentations. No, while we are waiting for questions.
Okay. Basically, I didn't want to summarize too much because we have got enough views from the speakers to suggest that the time has come that if you have to intervene in the Basilica, that's for clear. If we have to intervene in the Basilica, and the issue is if the present brown architecture, which is visible and which is going viral, which the government has also used in the Republic Day floats, and I know about it because along with my family, we were regular visitors to the Republic Day floats, and there was a lot on things centering around the Basilica. But if that is going to create a problem, and I think it was clearly mentioned, I think by Joaquim, that when he spoke to the stakeholders from that area, and most of them were really interested in salvaging the saint, and so they didn't mind if to protect the building, whether you needed plaster or you didn't need plaster was of lesser concern to them than the image of what that means to them. And I think that is more or less what is required. But the problem is with the kind of hype which the government has built around old Goa, not everyone is going to accept it easily. The question is, the government has to come into the picture. The archdiocese has to come into the picture to sort of really say plastering is not too bad. And if this is a kind of stone which is not like any of the other harder stones, and if the environment in Goa is getting from bad to worse as elsewhere in the world, and to that is, of course, another major problem we have found out is the location of Old Goa is located in a village panchayat called Se Old Goa. This more or less borders the municipal corporation limits in many ways of Panjim. And if you're talking of overspill from Panjim, so is this Se Old Goa panchayat looked upon as an overspill of development, or is it looked as an area where you have to have guarded development, guarded redevelopment? And obviously, sustainable development is an issue, but there are all these parameters of where the highway is going. Naturally, government is inclined to accept that people's pressures to build along it. But the kind of development which has taken place and the water channels that go into the river being blocked, there is a lot of accumulation of water around this area which is serving as a bowl. And I think that is dangerous. And so there is a reason as to why the planners will also have to come in. And I think that exercise is also on parallelly to get that plan done, not as a Se Old Goa Village Panchayat development plan, but a Se Old Goa Panchayat sustainable development plan. That is a very major change, which will have to, within which you have to work. And I think in that context, a decision will have to be taken, and will have to be taken soon, that intervention is required. And if plastering is the solution, so be it. And this is the expert group that can do it. This is the expert group that will give a lot of satisfaction to a mixed group. And it will help the archdiocese, it will help the government, it will help the others. And I think, surprisingly, it will also help the Archaeological Survey of India. Because when I spoke to them, they clearly told me, look, you all decide what you all want and we'll do it. We'll be glad to help out. But they don't want to take the risk of saying, because you all did it, so that who takes the blame for removing the plaster or adding the plaster kind of thing. So they want it to be a decision of the citizens. And it is participatory development which is the issue. And it is participatory development, which I think was the theme which Fleur was talking about. And I just want to mention one thing. It may take a little longer time. We are looking at built heritage. We have to make it very clear that built heritage in India are of two types. There is protection and preservation, and it is not interchangeable with conservation. It was earlier when the ASI Act was formed in 1908, the Conservation Manual and so on. Preservation and protection largely means touch me not, largely, postpone decay. Conservation means new uses for old. I mention this because preservation agenda in India is A, national monuments under the Archaeological Sites and Remains Act of 1958. There are about 4,000 such monuments, individual buildings, some with a curtilage, some group of monuments like Old Goa. Their preservation protection is a very critical issue. The second list is those which are regional monuments, which is a state act. Goa has a state act, which came about 10 years later into Goa, 78, which are what we call regional monuments. And both these acts, we must remember, has been strengthened. The first with 100 meters, 300 meters line, which the new Monument Authority, National Monuments Authority, and the other one with a 100-meter line. There is a third thing which Fleur has been talking about, is buildings, structures, sites, ruins, remains, which can be conserved under the Town and Country Planning Acts. And the first experience has been the Maharashtra Act, which was on for the last so many years. I know I was party to that because I was then chief planner of the government, and Shyam and others used to consult me on that, and we found out it could be done. Now, it was easy in Bombay for the simple reason the entire Bombay metropolis had only two protected monuments. It had the Elephanta Caves and it had the Canary Caves. There was no national monument. They've added a third one. It's a small place in Parel, and they're lamenting having brought it in because hardly had you shown it, then you've got 100 meters, 300 meters line, people can't do anything. So one has to separate the two. Why do I mention this? Basilica of Bom Jesus is a protected monument. The ASI does have a role within it, right? Their protection mandate is there. They are seeking help from the citizens in helping them do their protection mandate. And this is an area, while the church which Fleur has been talking about, the ASI, neither the state archaeology department comes into it. You have enough players there. You have the panchayats, and there you have the corporation, and you have so many others. But really speaking, the parishioners can come together within property, which is your own, and do that as per the laws pertaining there, right? So this is the big difference. And so when Shyam Chanani had a huge list which he wanted conserved, the architects nearly murdered him because all their works were being stopped. So to say, second is there is no government protection for those. So this is an issue which we are bringing into our project in Goa. I just thought I'll mention this. So basically, there are a few questions, I think, few clarifications which have come in. So Vishvesh, would you like to sort of select those questions and we... It's you're mute.
Yeah, sorry. We have grossly overreached our time. So one or two questions definitely will take. I think so. I fully appreciate the question by N. Tahir of why he's not the speaker on this platform. When he has some ideas, definitely we will have more platforms to discuss this idea moving ahead. I think so. We have taken the opportunity. Surely we will try to get your successful so-called methods which you're trying to do for the Basilica. We will have your views there on moving forward.
Vishwesh, I would like to intervene here. Yeah. I would like to say that since ages we have been talking about the conservation, preservation of Basilica at an intellectual level. And this has been going on since my tenure in Goa. But we have a solution. Why aren't we not looking into the solution? We are talking of two things. We are immediately jumping to the plastering. The plastering is the final stage. As the geologist friend of ours just mentioned, that first we have to repair the exfoliating surface, the weathered surface, which can be done. So going and talking about the plastering of the monument is subsequent, which is sacrificial layer. So let us not jump into immediately plaster. Let us go phase-wise. And I've demonstrated many a times in Portugal. I was there. You had made a presentation. In Goa, I made a presentation. Why not look into that critically? And I can show you the case studies, not only in St. Augustine complex, even in Madhya Pradesh, that the work is very successful. Let's just look into it. Let us take it forward. Only discussion, talking makes it will keep on going for another 10 years. And, and the ASI and the church both want to maintain a status quo. No one wants to take the first step. Let's just take this first step and demonstrate that it is possible without plastering. There's something implemented solution, and you know it. We can do it.
Yeah, you've made your point. We take it into consideration. Moving ahead, we will. There are intermediate steps, like about how Professor Delgado has said that there are 3-4 steps which needs to be taken. But overall, I think so. The fact that looking at two components, I think so. The overall impression that we want to take forward is like looking at part of the history, which definitely it is not definitely intellectual. It is more historical, and I think so. Rethinking about a historical component of it, that it was plastered for longest point of time, and that there's a particular kind of image of the church which is going around, which is the problem, which has to be understood. And the second problem is that also trying to think about heritage in terms of climate change. And we know, I think so, Professor Dr. José Rodrigues has shown that even the toughest of the stones can go into very severe degradation if you don't take care of it. So clearly, in times of climate change, with ICOMOS coming up with a new, not new, but really taking care of some of these things, we'll have to think about climate change as well. And new studies perhaps will have to be done thinking at what exactly is that climate change component affecting Basilica, perhaps something that some of the scientific studies which requires to be taken up locally here. But here, apart from that, there's one more question which is there.
May I answer 2 questions?
Yes, please go ahead.
There are 2 questions for me there. One concerns the situation of what happens with the walls when, due to the monsoons, the heavy rains, I presume. Of course, this is a serious problem. The stone laterite is a very porous stone, so it absorbs water very, very easily. So when water comes, the stone is soaked. So, and then this water moves around in the wall. And very likely, I do not know the situation exactly, but I presume that the water will infiltrate into the church. So I would expect that in the inner part of the church, there are severe wet spots. So humidity is certainly very high, and the walls are certainly moistened. And when this happens, biocolonization occurs, salts move around, and deterioration inside is certainly accelerated. So this is one point. So walls exposed in a very porous stone, absorption is very easy, and the water leaks through the interior. So another asks why I think that consolidation is not good for laterite. So this is not a definitive answer for me, because I don't know the stone. This is always a deduction. And what kind of deduction is? So first, laterite is very porous, with very big pores. And when we have big pores, the consolidants do not work. So it is not adequate to fill big pores with the consolidation. It is useless. So this is one reason for not expecting to have good consolidation for in laterites. Another point is because the laterite is very soft in some spots. These spots have certainly clays that are remains of the process of weathering was so at the same time that it is formed. So when some parts are consolidated with iron, the iron oxides and so on, and become hard. Others remain soft because they have clays. Or clays are not good for consolidation as well. So I would expect that these zones, the softer zones, would not be easy to consolidate as well. So the large pores are not consolidate, and the soft part of the stone do not accept consolidation easily. So I would expect to be very problematic to apply a consolidant, a traditional consolidant here. So this is why I assume that consolidation is not a good solution for, but it has to be tested. It can be tested. A university somewhere can help you to decide and to test for better answers.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think
Should
so.
I intervene here, Vishwesh?
No, I think so.
Should I
We
come
have really run out of time. We will take these things forward.
Okay.
I would just request Professor Edgar Ribeiro to close the session with final words.
I would say that generally,
Vishvesh,
yes.
sorry to intervene. I think we would like to thank everybody on behalf of the college. So can you do the honor, and then maybe Professor Ribeiro can close the session.
Yeah.
Vishvesh, I request you to do that.
No, yeah.
But before that, excuse me.
Yeah.
Before that,
sorry.
Okay. All right, you thank first. Yeah. Go ahead, Vishwesh.
Professor Rege, you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, sorry, Professor Ribeiro, if you want to finish, then we can do that later also. But I thought,
yes.
So if you want to make your comments, please go ahead, and then we'll do it. We'll do it at the end.
Well, I'll just say very briefly, I get the feeling after the presentations and some of the questions which have been asked, that there is a tendency to sort of relook at plastering and how that is to be done in a time frame, etc. We can work that out. I would suggest, we're very happy that Mr. Tahir has been able to participate in this discussion. He's a very important person. He's done a lot for preservation in Goa and even elsewhere. I would request him, because I have got the feeling he feels that you should still look at an option of how you can look at the present state and see how you can prolong it, and then you can try other sources. Maybe he can give us a little paper too in that connection. But I think I do know that we have to take action and take action fast. And that is the issue. And I think from angle, the presentations were all absolutely fantastic. And I think we have enough material to take it forward to this forum and to put it forward to another forum which is also working on this. Thank you very much. And that's what we'll do.
Sir. Thanks, organizers, for lovely presentations.
I think so. Thank you so much, everybody who's been present, patient with some of our problems with the computer and other these things. I think so this has been a very happy discussion. I wish that we could have taken more questions, and I think so. Tahir's work in Goa is really appreciable. He's done many things, including an Augustine's Tower, etc. We would like, hopefully, in some ways, moving forward, involve him as well in some of the discussions that are going ahead. But as a Goa College of Architecture, we are very happy to participate with ARTIS, Dr. Joaquim Santos, who initiated one of these discussions here. Especially because moving ahead, I think so, if we have academically discussed these things and we put together and we come together with some kind of feedback from experts, it will help people to make their decisions better. Not only in terms of heritage, but whether it is city design or sustainable architecture, we would like to take this opportunity to move forward. So once again, I thank Professor Edgar Ribeiro for chairing the session, long session at his age. I salute you. And similarly, other experienced people around who've been patient with us, who are here. Professor Rege for gladly accepting this conference as a part of the college things. Professor Rodrigues for his experience in conservation of heritage. Fleur with her experience in heritage with people and bringing conservation issues to people themselves. I can also see many other people, including Aldeves, Tisa, and other people who are there. Also Fernando, who is part of this thing, who was discussing behind. So thank you, everybody. And we hope we can have some more sessions moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Tahir. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.